CARICOM and Cuba meet in Guyana. They condemn blockades and foreign intervention.
The member states of CARICOM.
2 years on from the fire at Grenfell Tower in the UK, the community is still demanding justice for the victims. And the first general strike against President Jair Bolsonaro shuts down much of Brazil. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez from Quito, and this is From the South. The ministerial meeting between the Caribbean community, CARICOM, and Cuba is underway in Guyana. The foreign ministers of the 14 CARICOM countries and Cuba are meeting to promote solidarity and regional integration. At the opening ceremony, CARICOM reiterated its call for an end to the U.S. blockade against Cuba, while also rejecting U.S. intervention in Venezuela.
Recent actions against Cuba revive memories of that period, including the tightening of the unjust economic and financial embargo implemented earlier this month. The community reiterates its call for an immediate and unconditional end to the economic, commercial, and financial embargo imposed by the government of the United States of America against Cuba. CARICOM also rejects especially the unilateral and extraterritorial nature of these actions. CARICOM and Cuba both support the importance of multilateralism in the conduct of international affairs. We both adhere to the principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter, including non-interference, non-intervention in the internal affairs of states, prohibition of the threat and the use of force, respect for sovereignty, adherence to the rule of law, respect for the constitutional framework and democracy, and the right of people to self-determination. For both of us, it is critical that the Caribbean region remains a zone of peace.
Cuba's Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez spoke of the historical importance of uniting the Caribbean as he quoted revolution leader Fidel Castro.
We, the Cuban people, say to the men and the women who have made this region a group of countries with their own voices, dignity and independence in their foreign policies, that in this place the feelings of the leader of the Cuban Revolution, Fidel Castro, are still true. While speaking to his close friends, he said that no circumstances could change the interests and the will of Cuba to strengthen the ties of friendship and cooperation. And we will not hold back in our efforts to achieve regional integration between our people, unquote.
Our correspondent, Alison Kentish, has more details on this meeting.
The 6th CARICOM-Cuba Summit is taking place in Guyana today. According to a press statement from the CARICOM Secretariat, Caribbean foreign ministers and Cuba's foreign minister will hold dialogue on a number of areas of mutual interest, including CARICOM-Cuba relations. Also down on the agenda for discussion are some of the most pressing issues facing the region at this time, including climate change, tourism, and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Guyana's Foreign Affairs Ministry says visiting Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez Parilla was expected to meet with Guyana's President David Granger ahead of the summit. Foreign ministers from CARICOM met in caucus on Thursday ahead of the 6th CARICOM-Cuba Ministerial Summit. Now, Minister Parilla addressed the opening ceremony this morning along with CARICOM Secretary General Erwin Larocque and Guyana's Foreign Minister Dr. Karen Cummins. The very first CARICOM-Cuba Summit was held in 2002, and the gathering is seen as an important event in relations between Cuba and its Caribbean neighbors. This year's summit builds on CARICOM-Cuba cooperation, which has served as a model of collaboration in this region. In fact, at the opening ceremony this morning, CARICOM-Cuba relations, the entire aspect of relations, was described as a fine example of South-South cooperation.
That was Alison Kentish from Castries. The president of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, has arrived in Barbados for a 2-day official visit to hold bilateral talks. Akufo-Addo was greeted by Prime Minister Mia Mottley at the Grant Lee Adams International Airport, where he received a red carpet welcome and a 21-gun salute. President Akufo-Addo will later address Barbados Parliament, a historic occasion, as this will be the first time that a foreign dignitary will speak in the Senate. Barbados is the final country on the president's Caribbean tour, which also saw him visiting Guyana, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Trinidad and Tobago. Earlier, Ghana's president was in Trinidad and Tobago, where both countries backed dialogue and diplomacy to ensure peace in Venezuela.
International efforts are being made to bring about dialogue within the Venezuelan context, between Venezuelans. Other countries of the world are trying to encourage them. And Ghana's role as a leading West African and African country, and on behalf of not just Ghana, but the Caribbean and Venezuela, Ghana would do well to assist in ensuring that there are diplomatic initiatives maintained towards a peaceful solution and a speedy solution to the Venezuelan problem.
On the African side, whatever we can do also to assist those on this side to be able to have a positive resolution of the crisis in Venezuela, I think it is our moral duty to do so.
Now we head to the UK. Friday, June 14th, marks 2 years since a fire at Grenfell Tower in West London claimed the lives of at least 72 people. The 24-story tower block had turned into a death trap in the early hours of the morning as civilians looked on helplessly. Firefighters rushed to the scene of the blaze that would turn out to be the worst UK residential fire since the Second World War. That night, 72 lives, including those of at least 18 children, were lost. 2 years on, there is rising anger at the slow pace of justice and continued risks posed by buildings using similar combustible materials to those in Grenfell. And survivors of the Grenfell Tower fire and the families of the victims have come together to lay wreaths at the foot of the 24-story tower before staging a silent march through North Kensington on Friday evening. A day of remembrance began with a morning memorial service at nearby St. Helens Church, where families were joined by government ministers who this week were accused of stalling on actions to prevent similar tragedies. A number of events are taking place to mark the second anniversary of this disaster. And in another touching tribute, the Grenfell Towers were lit green overnight. The building was covered in a banner featuring green hearts, with a sign at the top saying, "Grenfell forever in our hearts." A public inquiry revealed that highly combustible material in the tower's cladding was the primary cause of the fire's spread. The tragedy put inequality in the spotlight and showed how poor multi-ethnic communities are often ignored. More than 200 high-rise buildings with similar cladding are yet to have work to remove it. And British political commentator Gary Young is calling the Grenfell Tower a charred monument to neglect by the powerful, who only see tragedy when it suits them, whether it's Windrush or Grenfell. In an article in The Guardian, Young said, "This fatal blaze in the heart of Britain's wealthiest borough signaled the brazen arrival of the four horsemen of the late-stage capitalism: inequality, austerity, deregulation, and privatization." The United States' request to extradite the Wikileaks founder Julian Assange from Britain will go to a full hearing in February next year. The decision was made during an initial hearing at Westminster's Magistrates' Court, as supporters of Assange protested outside. Assange spoke by video link from Belmarsh prison. He faces 18 charges in the United States of spying and leaking classified military and diplomatic papers. Many of them provided evidence of war crimes in Afghanistan and Iraq. Our correspondent Paro Navarrete spoke to journalist Chris Hedges outside the court on how he saw Assange during the hearing.
So I just came out of the courtroom for the preliminary hearing that set the schedule that will culminate with the extradition hearing, which will take place early next year in January. I mean, it's preliminary, so it can change, but they set that out. The next meeting is July 31st, then in October, then in December, and then and Julian was in. We could see Julian by video link. I visited him. I know Julian. He looked thin, but not. I didn't see any evidence of grave ill health. He spoke, he wanted to raise the issue of the charge of hacking, which the prosecutor raised, and he said that it was his understanding that he had not been actually charged with hacking by the U.S. government. I think he, as I understand the charges, he was in charge with conspiracy to hack because the U.S. government admits that he never got into the computer. He was trying to help Chelsea Manning mask her identity at the time so that she could retrieve information without being identified. That was a request by Manning. Julian said we know from leaks, from transcripts, that he would attempt to assist, but that it was unsuccessful. So he raised that issue. It was important for him, as he said, to recognize that neither he nor Wikileaks hacked, that they were publishers. That was the gist of his comment.
And when we come back, protesters in Honduras are now seeking to oust President Juan Orlando Hernández. We're taking a short break.
Infested by inequalities, abuse of power, and injustice, the American journalist Abby Martin covers the struggle for fundamental rights worldwide, deep into the search of files which uncover the empire's strategies through our screen and web platform in English. The Empire Files with Abby Martin. Tuesday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. We continue with more news at Telesur. Workers in Brazil have begun the first general strike against the government of President Jair Bolsonaro. From midnight, trade unionists across the country walked off the job, like these public sector drivers in Duque de Caxias. The strike was called on May Day by all the main union federations and focuses mainly on Bolsonaro's attempts to push through a pension reform, which they say will make it difficult for many workers to retire.
We close the avenue because this is an important day, because everyone knows how important the retirement system is, especially for youth, women and rural workers, and people are protesting across the country. This is a historic day that will affect us for years in terms of human rights and conquest, and in terms of the quality of life for the Brazilian working class, especially for young people like myself.
We know that this pension reform is a fraud, it's a lie, and the working class is going to pay a high price for it. That is why we are out here.
And some of the strikers in Sao Paulo took tires to block streets during the morning rush hour. Public transport has been paralyzed in much of the country. Brazil's landless workers movement cut highways in many rural districts as well. They say President Bolsonaro's policies will hit all working people in Brazil. Belo Horizonte is another of Brazil's major cities that has been shut down by the general strike. Thousands turned out from early in the morning, bringing the city center to a standstill. The government's pension reform is seen as the centerpiece of a series of neoliberal attacks on workers' rights and living standards. Our correspondent Brian Mir is following the strike in Sao Paulo.
I'm standing on Avenida 23 in downtown São Paulo, where participants in today's general strike have shut down one of the busiest avenues in the city during rush hour. Now, the strike is going on in hundreds of cities across Brazil. In many cities, the buses and trains are also on strike, and the demands are that Jair Bolsonaro, Brazil's far-right president's neoliberal retirement reforms are cancelled. The reforms call for passing management of the pension fund over to the private sector, to the private banks, based on the Chilean model, which has led to widespread poverty among senior citizens and one of the world's highest senior citizen suicide rates. Now, this coming on the back of two massive education strikes, which rocked the nation, just show that the momentum against the far-right president and his government is building in Brazil.
That was Brian Muir from Brazil. Now we head to Venezuela. The People's Militia is one of the most ambitious projects of the Bolivarian Revolution. It holds the idea by Hugo Chavez of unity between civilians and the military. Here's another in our series of reports on people's power in Venezuela.
In this barracks, around 200 militiamen train daily. They learn to handle weapons and practice martial arts. They're organized in people's defense units, each made up of 30 militiamen or women, grassroots bodies with a presence in communities and strategic industries throughout the country.
The militia was created to serve the nation wherever it was needed. We manage operations to provide healthcare, food, training for children, and help for the elderly.
We are a vast patchwork of wisdom and knowledge, ready to give everything for this country. We have engineers, doctors, nurses, housewives. But above all, we have a level of awareness and love, which is what motivates us.
In the current context of economic crisis, the militia is taking on tasks to ensure food security in the country. They help distribute the food boxes of the local supply and production committees, or CLAPs, and develop urban agriculture to promote food sovereignty for the Venezuelan people.
The enemy, the North, the United States, have squeezed the state's ability to import food. So we have to produce our food. And that's why the Commander-in-Chief is calling for the entire population to join in production. This will help overcome the blockade against us.
On April 13, 2019, the militia commemorated 10 years of its existence by presenting more than 2 million combatants in a massive parade. Their members continue to train in defense techniques.
The Bolivarian militia is one of the pillars of the revolution. At this moment, it is one of our greatest strengths. We work together as part of the people in the arms, trained, organized and prepared. In fact, the militia is the people defending the people.
Conceived by Hugo Chavez as the people in arms, the militia is an organization with deep ideological and political roots.
This won't fail because with all they've done to us, they give us strength. We continue to fight and resist. We are strong. We are war horses. We fight on any terrain. So make no mistake, Chavez sowed in good soil, and we are the fruit of that.
The Bolivarian militia is one of the backbones of popular support for the Bolivarian process.
Colombia's Defense Minister Guillermo Botero has survived a motion of no confidence filed by the opposition that wanted him to be removed from office. Botero stays on with 121 votes for and 20 against. The opposition filed a motion last month after an article in the New York Times exposed army orders to double the number of combat kills and captures. We have a special report from our correspondent in Colombia about the worsening situation in rural communities as residents are forced to leave due to violence.
Colombia's Ombudsman's office has issued an alert regarding the massive forced internal displacements throughout the country.
The Nariño department accounts for 43% of overall displacements, 3,540 people. This is evidence that forced displacements continues, and we are worried about the lack of guarantees to protect the rights of the population.
For Marco Romero, director of the human rights and displacement consultancy CODES, the figure is only a small fraction, which shows how deep the armed conflict goes in Colombia.
People are facing expulsion from their territories, and others dare to speak about ethnic cleansing. There's an obvious strategic interest in those territories and historically a lack of protection.
The Colombian departments demonstrating the largest figures of forced displacements are the same ones which have seen murders of social leaders. For several people living in the rural territories, it shows a clear interest behind the humanitarian situation.
This is a geographical war. They want to complete large economic projects, but us, indigenous people, are settled in the areas that they are interested in. These areas, such as Chocó and the Pacific, have resources that they want to exploit. It's not just about drug trafficking routes. They want to clear those territories to start mega projects like that Atrato Truandó, Interoceanic Canal, Tribuga Gulf, and railways for the Pacific.
While many are being forced to leave, others are being confined, and the figures are growing. 12,773 people have been affected by this situation. All of them are part of ethnic groups and communities which are still waiting for the social investments which were promised by the government.
There is no let-up in the protests by doctors and teachers in Honduras. But now some are proposing a wider movement to overthrow President Juan Orlando Hernandez and install a constituent assembly. Gilda Silvestrucci reports.
Protests are continuing on main streets across Honduras until President Juan Orlando Hernandez offers transparent and credible talks.
The talks must be open. The media, like yourselves, need to know clearly what's happening, with no secret deals stitched up in the middle of the night. We want transparency.
The government still hasn't responded to the protesters' demands, while violent repression by the police and the military has increased.
They pulled me by the hair and took my backpack. They tried to take my phone, but I wouldn't let them. Show me your face, I said. Why are you hitting me? They say they'll take me away.
The government had offered talks, but on its own conditions, which weren't accepted by the teachers and doctors. The economic losses caused by the protests and roadblocks have drawn angry reactions, even among those who previously supported the government. While the protests continue, various sectors of society are anxiously discussing how to overcome the current political crisis. Politicians, businessmen, and church leaders are all looking for solutions. Some are suggesting a transitional government and a national constituent assembly.
Rather than a constituent assembly now, what we need is a process of transition that can gradually put an end to the dictatorship, and then we can think about a constituent assembly.
For others, the only solution possible is one that comes from the demands of those most affected by a situation where 70% are living in poverty.
There is no more room for traditional politicians to carry on in the same old way. Things have to change once and for all. They have to listen to the people and understand that that is the only way out.
The latest round of protests began as a union struggle, but now there is talk of a wider alliance of social movements that can bring everyone together to get rid of President Hernandez and his government.
Coming up, Copa America begins today. Which country is more likely to win this football cup? We'll tell you after the break.
Enjoy the best content in spaces where you will discover new perspectives. Innovation, well-being, conservation, equity, traditions. A wide variety of contents that you will find on Telesur, the news source of Latin America and the Caribbean.
for joining us again. More stories now. Iran is denying responsibility for Thursday's attacks on oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has said that Washington believes Iran was behind the incident, adding that the U.S. had made its assessment based on intelligence about the type of weapons used. But Iran has dismissed the claims. In a statement, the Iranian mission to the UN said Iran categorically rejects the U.S. unfounded claim with regards to the June 13 oil tanker incidents and condemns it in the strongest possible terms. The president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, has met with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Kyrgyzstan. President Putin congratulated Modi on his recent electoral win. He also congratulated him for receiving the Order of St. Andrew, the highest honor bestowed by Moscow on April 12. Russia has had strong historic ties with India since the Soviet Union invested in the country following its independence from the British Empire in 1947. Since then, the two states have signed several treaties of mutual cooperation and friendship.
I would like to congratulate you on the confident victory of your party and your re-election as India's Prime Minister. Dear Mr. Prime Minister, we have done a lot for the development of our bilateral relations. Our relations developed steadily due to your personal efforts and attention to the development of Russian-Indian relations.
In Sudan, the African Union has stepped up its efforts to create a lasting solution to the political situation in the country. The African Union envoy to Sudan committed to a peaceful solution in the country, as representatives from the United Nations and the European Union join mediation efforts. The AU is pushing Sudan's ruling military council and opposition towards a transition to democracy, since talks between them were deadlocked before a crackdown which led to at least 118 deaths. Prisons in Zimbabwe face critical medication shortages and overcrowding. The African country is facing extensive sanctions imposed by the United States, and many facilities lack ambulances and basic medication like antibiotics. Prisons like the Chikurubi Maximum Security Prison are designed to hold just over 1,300 inmates, but this jail currently houses more than 2,500 people. Copa America kicks off today in Brazil with 12 teams competing for South America's premier football title. Host Brazil takes on Bolivia in the inaugural match at the Morumbi Stadium in the city of Sao Paulo. 10 countries featuring in the tournament are part of the governing body of the South American Football Association, the CONMEBOL, and 2 other international teams have been invited to participate, Japan and Qatar. Chile is the current holder of the Copa America and will try to retain the trophy against the continent's giants, as they hope to win a 3rd successive title. In the last edition in 2016, Chile beat Lionel Messi's Argentina on penalties. Host Brazil is the current favorite, but playing on home soil isn't always an advantage, as seen in the 2014 World Cup. In other sports, England is chasing 213 runs to beat the West Indies at the ICC Cricket World Cup. Continues in Southampton. Mark Wood and Jofra Archer picked up 3 wickets apiece to end West Indies' innings at 212 all out, with more than 5 overs left. The West Indies felt the brunt of England's bowling as they were only able to make 8 runs of the first 5 overs. With that, we end our news brief, but you can find more of our stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, you can find us on Starsat channel 461 in South Africa and 539 in Nigeria. And you can also join us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.